So, with today's session, we're going to be talking about really how you can use the career clusters and that real framework of the 6 career clusters to support university decisions for your young people. University is a big decision. It's often quite complex for a young person trying to decide what they want to study and where they want to study it. And the clusters aren't going to be the solution that solves all of their problems. It's not going to make the entire decision process go away. They're still going to have to think about some complex things, but the clusters can really help them sort of find a place to start and then really clarify some of their thinking. So we're going to talk about all of that today. So to start off the session, we're going to be talking first about how young people make decisions about university at the minute. I think it's really important to start with that in mind. So having a good look at what kind of decisions that they make and how they're making those decisions. Then we're going to really quickly cover how the clusters work. So if you've already heard about the clusters before, you've already seen me talk about them, then I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. And then towards the end of the session, we're going to talk about how you can use the career clusters to really flip the script when it comes to talking about career choices and university course choices with your students. This is a quote I love all the time, and I think it's really pertinent to talk about when we're talking about university decisions, because we know that young people, older people as well, including myself, but young people often don't make calculated, careful decisions based on a really good understanding of themselves and of the places where they might want to go. We tend to make mental shortcuts. I know I do it. I know lots of people that I talk to do it, and it's a completely normal thing to do. So with the clusters and with this process, what we're going to try and do is help them make better shortcuts or help them build some more understanding and break down some of those assumptions so that when they are making those quick decisions or where they are sort of going with their gut a little bit, they can be making more informed decisions and better shortcuts. We know that when we're talking about young people and the way that they decide what they're going to do when they go to university, we really need to also be talking about families, particularly parents, caregivers, those kind of real key people within that young person's life, because the influence of their parents and their family members on their university decisions is pretty key. There's some research that's come out that's shown that where a parent has an aspiration for their child to go to university, that child is 4 times more likely to go to university than a child where the parents aren't concerned about whether or not their child actually goes. So that alone tells us that the parents have this really pivotal role, this really key decision-making role within their young person's choices. So I'm going to reference that as we go through the session. And when I'm talking about how you can use the clusters, I'm going to talk about how you can also use them with parents. But I think it's really important to keep that in mind right from the start, that it's not just about the young person themselves. It's actually about the entire family making this decision about what they're going to do when they leave school. And what we know is that sometimes when the parents are influencing this decision, it might be that the parents have decided that the young person is going to go to university, but then the young person gets to choose what they actually do at university. And sometimes we see them do this thing that we kind of call occupation shopping. Wanda Hayes is the lovely person who came up with the term, or where I first heard it anyway. And how she describes it is that her students will basically walk through a supermarket and just pluck university courses or pluck career paths off a shelf and stick them in their cart. And then when they get to the other end, they'll decide which one they want to go with. And those career paths and those university courses have very little bearing on the students' abilities, their interests, their strengths, their skill sets. They'll have very little bearing on what kind of career paths they might lead to. It's just this real sense of like, okay, cool, what looks bright and shiny and what do I think sounds fun and interesting? And I'm just going to pluck that off the shelf and then make that decision and stick with that, which is one of those shortcuts that I talked about a minute ago. It's one of those quick ways of making decisions, but it's not always the best way of going about things. And the other thing that we see all the time when we talk about young people and how they make their career decisions is that, and this often comes out up in one-on-one sessions, what I have with students, is they have this fear of wasting their results, particularly when they're a high achiever. And what it is, it kind of works 2 ways. So before they get their results, they've got this mentality where they have to work out or kind of guess what they think, what their results are going to look like. And then they're kind of browsing around those courses that they think are in that sort of achievable range based on their results. And that's great. Like, it's good that they're thinking about whether or not their decisions are going to be or those courses are going to be achievable. But it's going from a position of what's, meeting my ATAR and meeting my final results first, not what kind of careers do I want to do, or what kind of things am I interested in, or what would I like to do once I finish my university course. And it also happens the other way around. So once they've got their results, they kind of want to go back to the table, and it's like they've got this a set amount of points almost, or of a set amount of money that they've got to spend, and they want to spend all of it. They don't want to waste any of it. So they want to enroll in whatever course they think is going to be the most closest to their highest result that they can get into. And that's what they go for. And that does have, it might not be the entire decision, but it does have a really big impact on the actual decision that they make and the kind of courses that they're going for. So in the interest of trying to give them a different way to think about things, we can use the career clusters. And if you've seen them before, then I really apologize. I'll try and be as brief as possible. If not, there's lots of other resources that talk about the career clusters on our YouTube channel and on our website, but I'm just going to go over them really quickly now. We have 6 clusters. They're the makers, the informers, the guardians, coordinators, linkers, and innovators. And each cluster is a group of people who are brought together with a holistic way of looking at work. So we're thinking about things like the tasks they do, the skill sets that they share, and the impact that they want their work to have. Makers are people who make things happen, so really physical, hands-on work, operating equipment, flying planes, driving trucks around, that kind of real active role. Informers are people who've got usually a large amount of knowledge about something, and they use that knowledge to then support other people. Guardians are all about health and well-being, and that includes healthcare roles, but also people like fitness trainers who help us maintain our well-being. We've got coordinators, and coordinators are the people who make things happen. So they keep everything running on track, and they manage everything. And you're going to find coordinators at every level of an organization, from on the front desk right through to the CEO. Linkers are people who help us really connect with the things, the products, the services, the kind of support that we need. So it includes people like social workers, enrollments officers, that kind of thing. And the innovators, these are the designers, the engineers, the real problem solvers, and they use their creativity to kind of find solutions to problems and then go and work with other clusters to enact those solutions. This is the career cluster wheel, and it shows you, I'm not sure if you can see it really clearly, but it shows you how we can break those clusters down again based on the skill sets that they actually have. So within each cluster, it's not just everyone is exactly the same. There will be some people within each cluster who work in different ways. And what we also know, we've actually heard from around 2,500 adults now about their careers and the clusters that they're in. And what I find is that particularly adults, not so much with the school kids, but particularly adults, they actually operate in more than one cluster at once. So we're not all just kind of pigeonholed into that one cluster the whole time. We're usually operating across a couple. We like to think in clusters, not boxes. I find when you box people in, they kind of get this real strong mentality around what they can and can't be. Whereas we know that people's careers aren't like that. We move, we grow, our careers are dynamic and non-linear. And when we think in clusters, we can see how we can move and shift and grow and change throughout our career. And I always find that it's great to kind of know that theory behind the clusters, but then it works much better when you see an example. And this is an example within a university setting. And what we know is that within every workplace and every organization, you're probably going to find people who represent each of those clusters. They might not all be employed by the organization. Like not every single business is going to have one person from each 6 clusters employed and on staff. But they will need those kind of tasks to be done, and they'll be linking in with other people who can kind of bring in those tasks and meet the role of that cluster in one way or another. So within a university, you're going to have a really large number of informers. They're the lecturers, the librarians, those people who are actually delivering the education. But you're also going to have people who keep the Wi-Fi running, which is incredibly important on a university campus. People who are doing the marketing for the university, future students, even down to people like those who are working in accessibility and inclusion and those kind of fields, they're guardians. So we have all of these people on the university campus. And when we start to use the clusters, it helps us to see all of those different roles instead of just thinking, oh, university has to be a lecturer. That's the only thing that I can do on a university campus is be a lecturer. We can do a lot more than that. And what I really like about the clusters, or why we designed them in the first place, is because you can bring the clusters together with an interest, and then I'll give you a career idea. We know that often finding a place to start is the most difficult thing for young people. They find it's very overwhelming. There's so many options out there, and they can really struggle to kind of find something tangible to grab onto. But when we give them their cluster and when they can think about the things that they're interested in, they can then bring those two together. And not every time, but often it's enough to kind of give them a little bit of a spark, and then they're off and having different conversations and thinking about different things. So when we're talking about using the clusters to make informed decisions about what university choices they're going to make, you've got a couple of things you can do. You can use the career cluster quiz, and there's a verification link, which I will make sure is in the comments. But that quiz is really short. It's 5 minutes. I'm going to show you through it in a second. And what it does is I'm also going to review some PDFs that we've created that actually link the clusters with possible courses. I'm going to show you those in a minute too. And then towards the end, I'm going to actually go through two options that I use when I'm talking to students and I'm using the clusters. One for students who've got a really clear idea of where they want to go, and then another for students who aren't really sure about what they want to do next. So the quiz, if you haven't seen the Career Cluster quiz yet, it's free. It's open access for all educational use. We've got thousands and thousands of students who have used the quiz already, coming up to that 10,000 student number now. We have a huge number of schools from all over the world who are using the clusters, and that's so exciting because we're seeing that young people are able to then make some good decisions based on those clusters. And the feedback that we're getting from our educators is that it is making things a little bit easier. So you can use them in any kind of setting that you like. We have some that are using them in information sessions, some that's just sending out the link once they've all set up and then asking their students to do it in their own time. And we've also had some great success with including parents in the conversation. So asking parents to take the quiz at the same time as their students. It's a really simple quiz. There's just 30 questions. Tends to take them around 5 minutes to complete, and students are more than capable of completing it entirely by themselves. It's forced choice. And sometimes what I find is that actually the process of going and making those choices, picking which one they want or they don't want, is a huge part of the process. It actually gives them insights into themselves without knowing necessarily what clusters they are. And then when they're finished, they get results that look a bit like this. So we don't tell them you are definitely in this cluster and you're definitely not in that cluster. We just give them their results and then we let them make of them what they will. And usually we find that this is a great time to start those conversations, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's just with their peers in small groups, or whether they want to take those cluster results home and have those conversations. If you've got a student who's got their cluster results on hand while we're going through the next part of this process about making their university decisions, then that's going to be probably a little bit easier to start with. But if you don't want these students to be doing the quiz, or for some reason they don't feel comfortable doing the quiz, you don't need to do that. You can just have maybe that wheel, which I'm also going to make available to you after this, the cluster wheel, or you could just like literally have the names of the 6 clusters and a little bit of information about each. And that can be enough for the young person to kind of have those in mind while they're making those decisions. This is the sheets that I told you I was going to share at the end. So we'll be putting those into the chat in a minute. Basically, what we've done is we've used the study areas, the 21 study areas, and we've broken them down by cluster. And we've made some suggestions about the kinds of courses that might suit someone who wants to study in that particular area and who is in each of those cluster areas. And it's not designed to get them thinking wildly out of the box. It's just designed to kind of open up their minds a little bit, give them a couple of extra ideas. And those sheets are in a PDF. And that, like I said, they'll be made available after this as well. So the first place to start with the second half of this session of actually using the clusters to make career decisions is by asking whether our student that we're supporting has a strong course or a strong career idea or not. We know that if sometimes people come to us and they've got this really great, clear idea of where they want to go, and so that conversation is maybe more like mechanics of how they're going to get there or what kind of scholarships are available. But there's also some that come to us with less of an idea or maybe an idea that needs a little bit more unpacking. And what we also know is that sometimes in this process, when I've used this process with students, is sometimes things change. So they might have had a really clear course idea, and then it's a week out from their final submission for their preferences, and they completely change their minds. And I have had that happen in sessions where we have literally been about 2 clicks submit on somebody's preferences, and they've said, hang on, no, I want to change my order around. I want to change things up. So things definitely do change. We know that some students have a clear idea, and These are the ones that I find they're often feeling quite comfortable about that idea. They might have had it for quite a long time. They're feeling like it really matches who they are and they've done some deep thinking about it. Usually their family's on board, so they're not getting kind of flack from home, or they're not getting kind of that conflicting or confusing information from the home setting. And sometimes these are the kids who've had some sort of personal experience with some sort of career path, or some sort of event has happened in their life, and that's really helped them cement that this is the right pathway for them. So sometimes we see kids who've gone through mental health issues might decide that they really want to do psychology because they feel like they've got this experience with that, they're comfortable with it, mum and dad's on board, and it makes sense for them to go and do that psychology. With these kinds of students, we have 2 steps. So the first step is we sit down and we go, right, okay, what are your clusters and what's your current career choice? Let's look at how they might fit together. And there's no right or wrong when you're doing this. Like, it's not a case of, oh, no, that cluster definitely doesn't match that course, because it's up to the student to decide whether or not they feel like that matches. And they might have a different idea about where they want their career to go than we can see. And that's okay, because it's their career and they're the ones who have got to live it and going to be making those decisions. So there's no right or wrong. If that you find that their cluster is not matched to the course that they've picked, or they're feeling like now they know their clusters that maybe they need to rethink, then that's when you might need to bump them up to step 2. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But they might need to explore a little bit further before they're ready to kind of unpack and make some more career decisions about that. But if not, then we go on to step 2, which is we start to ask them, okay, well, if I know my cluster and I know the kind of course that I want to go and do, then let's have a look at what else might be possible. And what I find is that when you do this with a young person, it does a couple of things. To start with, it works in that kind of planned happenstance, chaos theory kind of way, in that we're saying to them, you may go down that pathway, but you might also explore these other pathways when you get there. And that's okay. So we're giving them kind of like a bit of a get out of jail free card. And we're saying to them, if you go down this course and then you change your mind, here are some other things that you could also do with that course, or some other pathways you might take. One of the other things that it's doing is it actually shows that the student has done their homework. And that can be really great with getting parents on board. So it may be, particularly if parents aren't 100% on board with the student's decision, or the student's kind of thinking slightly differently to what the parents are. If they can say, well, I want to go and do this course and I think I'm going to go here with it, but if I decide not to go here, I could also go here, here, and here, then that's going to give them that kind of ammunition that they need to prove, well, hey, I've actually thought about this really well. I've done some deep thinking and I think this really suits where I want to go. So I like to use examples. So if we had an example with situation 1 where we've got a student who's considering engineering, they're pretty certain that that's what they want to do. Like, they've thought about it quite a bit. They definitely see themselves as a future engineer. So that's kind of where we're going with this. And they're a strong innovator and coordinator. So that student's turned up to me and they're a strong innovator and a strong coordinator. Then I'm going to be saying to them, okay, cool. That sounds like it's something that matches with engineering. Engineering and innovation go really well together. So cool, let's take that pathway. Let's go, yes, the first step has been met. So move on to step 2. What else is going to be working within that kind of cluster and study area pathway? So we might start talking about things like project management, especially as a coordinator. Project management is something that a lot of engineers kind of end up kind of moving into anyway. So it's good to have that in their minds, that they might be able to use that coordinator side of things with engineering down the track. We might talk about something like surveying, and we also might talk about something like architecture, which is similar again, but it might just kind of get them thinking that they might go down a different path. And I know there are different degrees for architecture and engineering, but it's just giving them those options and getting them to start thinking a little bit more outside of the box. If, on the other hand, we've got a student who's considering engineering, but they turn out that they're a strong linker and a guardian, those clusters aren't necessarily quite as good a match for engineering. They may still well be, but we probably need to do a little bit more exploring before we can make any decisions about that. So we would head on to step 2. So with step 2, we've got students who have a less idea about what they want to do. And I put the little redhead kid on the phone in the corner there because my 15-year-old is redheaded and he spends a lot of time on his phone and he has less idea about what he wants to do. He knows he really likes biology, but he's not really sure where he's going to go with that right now. And that's pretty typical for what we see with young people, even up to the end of year 12. They might not have thought about it yet. They're so busy getting through year 12, and I totally understand that. They're busy getting to the end of school and taking their final exams and doing all these assessments. Plus, they've got social lives and jobs and everything else that happens. So they might just not have got around to it yet. It's something that they were going to do in the future. They also sometimes are those students who've ruled out something that they really thought they were going to do. So for a long time, they had a really clear plan and they knew where they were going. And then for one reason or another, whether it was a final assessment result that's come back, or they've actually gone and done work experience finally and realized that that pathway wasn't for them, or whatever it was. So sometimes we see those students coming into this kind of section. And often with these students, there's a risk that they've made a quick decision. So they've kind of taken that mental shortcut, but not a particularly good one, and they've made a decision very, very quickly, and we need to sort of stop for a second and unpack that a little bit just to check that it's right for them. So with these students, what we do is we start by combining their clusters with the things that they're interested in. So they might not have a clear course preference, but generally young people can decide what they're interested in, and that might be as simple as what kind of movies do they watch, or what kind of activities do they do outside of school? Do they play sport or not? What kind of clubs are they in? What kind of subjects do they take? And that conversation is going to be unique for every single student. So you're going to have to, in that conversation, that's where kind of those interests are going to get pulled out. And that's what we do as professionals, is we're quite good at that. But we bring those interests together with their clusters. And then we can move on to step 2. So once we've got their interests on one side and we know their clusters on the other, then we can start to look for a place to start. So let's have a look at what that looks like in reality. If we've got a student who's taken the cluster quiz and then thought about their interests, and they've worked out that they are a linker and a guardian, perhaps it's that student from the last example that we used, and they also like working on projects and they like things like technology, then we can bring those two together and start to think about some of the different paths that they might go down. And that's just going to help them. It might not give them the answer straight away, but it is going to give them a little bit they can think about. So if you had a student who turned up and had said to you, I'm thinking maybe engineering, but they're a linker and a guardian, then that's where you could use something like these, the PDFs that we've created, and you could go, okay, right, so let's have a look at engineering related study area kind of degrees that have suit maybe linkers and guardians. And I mean, in this example, we have Bachelor of Biomedical Engineering might be good for a guardian, and a Bachelor of Engineering combined with a Bachelor of Business might be good for a linker. And that they might not go off and do those particular, we're not saying go and do that particular degree. We're just saying, hey, here's a degree that you might not have thought of. Did you know that you can combine business with engineering? Let's have a look at some of the ways that that might eventuate and what might happen if you did that pathway. But because they've got something tangible to start with, they've got that place to start the conversation, then everything else kind of gets easier from there. So those are my 2 main pathways for using the clusters with university conversations. I think that at the end of the day, it's all about those conversations that we can have, and the clusters are just a conversation tool. They're not magic. They can't see inside of a young person's head, but what they can do is they can give you some kind of different language that you can use and some different ways of talking about work and career paths and where they might go, so that you can start those really positive career conversations.